Conservation about the amazing and astounding ecology of the Hudson River watershed. So with that, I think we can jump into kind of what we're going to cover today. So maybe next slide, Adam. Thank you. So real quick, we're going to be covering with Chris, and thereafter we'll talk about some of the uh, amazing attributes of the Hudson River. We'll take a deep dive into the species that call the Hudson River and the entire watershed their home with Chris, and then a brief Q&A for a few minutes after the Chris presents on the ecology of the Hudson. And then the habitat restoration team will provide a brief overview of Riverkeeper's work to protect and restore habitat throughout the watershed. Next slide. Thanks. Oop. Okay. So we'll take a quick look at the Hudson River system. So the source of the mighty Hudson River is this tiny lake in the Adirondacks called Lake Tier of the Clouds. The lake gets its name because of its elevation at over 4,000 feet above sea level. And from this source, the river flows roughly 315 miles to New York City, where it empties into the Atlantic Ocean. The total drainage or the area that collects waters from the land and the water of the Hudson River is an amazingly over 13,000 square miles. I think that's roughly twice the size of New Jersey. So the lower 153 miles of the Hudson River below the federal dam in Troy functions as a tidal estuary. This is an estuary where the river meets the sea, and they mix with one another. And the Hudson is called the river that flows both ways, due largely to its estuarian and tidal nature, exchanging roughly 60 billion gallons of seawater on the incoming tide and 80 billion gallons of fresh water from the river on outgoing tide every single day. Just an amazing hydrology of the system. The Hudson becomes so mighty due to the dozens of tributaries that flow into it, like the arteries and veins of our hearts. The Hudson, I think about the Hudson as the heart of New York. And there are nearly 4,000 miles of tributaries that feed the main stem of the Hudson River. Next slide. So as we'll probably hear, estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems on the planet, and the Hudson River is no exception, representing basically the equivalent of a biological superhighway. There are over 200 species of fish that have been observed in the Hudson, and due to its sort of partially open nature, it is also the home to a variety of migratory species during critical periods of their life cycles. The diversity of habitats in and along the Hudson is remarkable, including tidal wetlands, freshwater marshes, shallow mudflats, wooded riparian floodplains that provide nursery, foraging, and spawning habitats for a variety of species, as well as the Hudson serving as a critical part of the Atlantic Flyway, a major migratory north-south route for migrating birds. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Bowser. He's going to talk to us today about the amazing ecology of the Hudson River. Chris is the education coordinator with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Hudson River Estuary Program. He wears a lot of hats. Hudson River National Estuary and Research Reserve, and the New York State Water Research Institute at Cornell University. Welcome and thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you very much, David. What an excellent introduction. Hello to everybody out there. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Chris Bowser, but everybody just calls me Bowser. That's totally fine. I've worked for quite a few years here along the Hudson River, along Mahikani-Tuk, the waters that are never still. And I currently work for the DEC and Cornell University, but I used to work for the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. And I just want to give a special shout out right off the top to Riverkeeper And for all of the different groups that work on the Hudson River, we have such a mosaic of agencies, individuals, universities, and like advocacy-based nonprofits that mosaic is really a net that helps support and buoy up the Hudson River and really is working to make this the absolute world class estuary that it is. Hopefully you can see David did a great job of giving a really terrific review of these three key terms. So if there was a quiz at the end of this, which there isn't, these would be the vocab words that you'd want to know. And I especially want you to focus on that word estuary. So just to review a little bit, David mentioned that the mighty Hudson River, the sort of the headwaters of the Hudson River, are way up in the Adirondacks. Lake Tier of the Clouds. Look in the middle of the picture. Look at that little lake right there. So this is a picture taken from Mount Marcy, or Tahowas, the highest peak in New York State. And you are looking at the start of the Hudson River watershed. But remember, although we put a lot of focus on Lake Tier of the Clouds as the headwaters, really the Hudson River starts anywhere, including probably your own backyard. Anywhere a raindrop falls down and hits the land, that is arguably the headwaters, the source of the Hudson River is all around us all the time. David also mentioned another key part of this river, this idea of the estuary. This is the federal dam at Troy, New York. So to, at least how I'm looking at it, to the right of the picture, the high water, that's the non-tidal Hudson River. But then it spills over that dam and you are looking at those rapids. That is the head of tide. That is the start of the Hudson River estuary, which is really unique because this estuary extends for over 150 miles from the Battery at New York City all the way to that federal dam at Troy. And this is when we think of the Hudson, or when we think of the mid-Hudson Valley, this is kind of what we think of, this great landscape of hills, wetlands, bridges, towns, cities, farms, forests, tiny little vernal pools. All of these things are making this Hudson River estuary and its surrounding watershed this powerful, powerful thing. And amongst all of the great things that are living here, of course, are fish. And one of David's slides mentioned that there's over 200 species of fish that have been found throughout the Hudson River watershed. I might pick on a couple today, but I want to really encourage listeners, if they have any questions about any fish at all, put those questions in the chat box. And don't you, it can be about anything, even if I'm not talking about it. I always love to try and get stumped by questions. So if you've got a Hudson River fish question, or even just a Hudson River fish story, put that in the chat box. We'll see if we can get to it. But I had mentioned, that estuary is bounded by a couple things. We've got the federal dam at Troy, and even though the waters are going up and down there, salt water is not really reaching up there. But at the other end of that estuary, at New York Harbor, that is a direct connection to the Atlantic Ocean. And at that end of the estuary, in and around New York Harbor, we have some amazing, amazing animals. I threw a seahorse on this slide because some people are shocked to learn that the lined seahorse not only lives in New York Harbor, it thrives in New York Harbor. And what's stunning to me is that if you actually ever see a seahorse, it's got this delicate tail so it can grab on to weeds and ropes and everything underwater. It kind of floats in the current. It's not the strongest swimmer. It doesn't even look like it should be able to survive, but it does. And it is excellently adapted to the busy waters of New York Harbor. And there's a lot of other primarily saltwater, even marine species that you can find in this incredible sort of like circulatory system of New York Harbor with atriums and ventricles and everything going on here. So I want to sort of give credit to these saltwater fish like the seahorse. Speaking of New York Harbor, one of my favorite events every year happens in New York Harbor. It's called A Day in the Life of the Hudson and Harbor. This is actually a program that the DEC puts on along with dozens of other partners, including Riverkeeper, including Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. And this is kind of a field trip times 100, where on the entire, and really throughout the entire watershed, including the Mohawk and the Upper Hudson River, about 5,000 students and teachers sort of converge on the Hudson River shoreline. And some of them are urban waterfronts like Brooklyn Bridge Park here. Some of them are in much more rural areas. But in all these cases, these are people that are exploring the river, testing the water for temperature, for dissolved oxygen, for the salinity, and especially for the fish that are living here. And you can see some local students pulling a seine net through the water to see what's living there. Now, I promised Adam I wouldn't overdo it on data, but I can't help but throw a few graphs in here from time to time. And although we're going to talk about some of the big fish that everybody thinks are famous, like seahorses, there's a couple of humble fellows that tell us some cool stories about the river. And I want to introduce you to two of my favorite. Okay. To the left is the Atlantic silverside. All right. This is a saltwater fish, gets to be maybe 4 inches long, would be a big one. And then to the right is the spot tail shiner. Kind of similar color, similar size, but found almost exclusively in freshwater. And what's really cool about these two fish species is if you look down, this just happens to be a data set from 2023, but honestly, I could pick almost every year. And what you see is the river miles represent the miles on the Hudson River as you measure north from New York City. So New York City, the Battery would be River Mile 0, and Albany is around River Mile 145. So you can see that the Atlantic silverside and the spot tail shiner barely overlap. But what's interesting, where they overlap is almost magically corresponds with what we call the salt front. The leading edge of the most dilute salt water corresponds with where these two species meet and barely merge. So even if we don't have, high-tech salinity monitors in the water, we can actually look at bioindicators, the abundance of fish species, and they can tell us what's going on in the river. So even these little humble species that we might not give two thoughts about, we just group them into minnows and little things, they've got a really important story to tell. And as we track that over the years, we can see that you don't even have to read this graph. Just knowing that all three lines kind of group together is telling us that spot tail shiners and Atlantic silversides and the salt front are all telling us something about the river that's really cool. Now, I want to talk about a couple of our diadromous fish. So here's vocab word number 4, I guess, for you. Diadromous refers to a fish that migrates between freshwater and saltwater at some point in its lifetime. They might hatch in freshwater or they might hatch in saltwater, but at some point in their life, they're moving between the two. And these include really famous species like the shad, like the striped bass, which right now, as I look out on the Hudson River from my roost here at the Norrie Point Environmental Center, I can literally count the recreational fishing boats that are out there looking for striped bass, right? So these diadromous fish are really powerful symbols of the Hudson because they're kind of their life cycles are leading them out to sea often. We often don't see them for years at a time. And when they come back with their bodies built up by the nutrients of the sea. It's a pretty powerful metaphor of how we're connected. And actually, it's more than a metaphor. It's their lives. One of the species that we're most interested in is the mighty sturgeon. And when we talk about sturgeon in the Hudson River, we have two species of sturgeon within the tidal Hudson River. One is the Atlantic sturgeon, and these are the big beasts of the river. They typically will often catch them at 7 to 8 feet long, and we've even used side scan sonar to image a couple of sturgeon that reach 12 and 14 feet long. So there are still these gentle giants cruising the Hudson River and spawning up in the river. The other species of sturgeon is the short-nosed sturgeon. And because it's a little smaller, it doesn't often get the same amount of love that the Atlantic sturgeon does. But I'll say this, if you wanted to have a true mascot of the estuary, it would be the short-nosed sturgeon because they literally live within that range of New York Harbor, where some of them overwinter in the harbor, and the Troy Dam, where some of them spawn at the base of the Troy Dam. So these short-nosed sturgeon are the symbol of Mahikanituk, that Hudson River estuary. It's probably pretty well known that both sturgeon species have faced a pretty rough century. Habitat loss and alteration, bycatch fisheries, and earlier in the century, targeted fisheries, and then just accidental and incidental mortality through boat strikes. They have all really, really weathered the sturgeon populations, or at least they had, thanks to a lot of good federal policies like the Endangered Species Act, thanks to a lot of good state policies like the closure of fisheries in the Hudson River, and thanks to a lot of good advocacy work to pick apart these problems, we actually have a good story to tell about short-nosed sturgeon. So what my colleagues at the DEC have done is they've taken a lot of these sturgeon and they've tagged them. They've actually caught them, surgically implanted acoustic tags. These are almost like pit tags that if the sturgeon gets close enough to a reader, ping, it'll get pinged on that reader, and we can know what is going on, where that fish is. And thanks to a lot of really, really deep research on where these sturgeon overwinter and spawn, we've been able to determine how many tagged fish are detected in the river. Then what we can do is we can use side scan sonar to sort of image the entire population of overwintering short-nosed sturgeon or spawning Atlantic sturgeon. And we can kind of use a ratio of the tagged to the untagged. And it starts to give us a grand total of those fish that are in the river. Now, this next slide is going to have a lot of graphs and a lot of data and a lot of numbers. But I want you to pay attention to the circled number. When it comes to short-nosed sturgeon, we've got a very recent estimate that we might be looking at about 70,000 short-nosed sturgeon in the tidal Hudson River. And now that comes with some wide confidence intervals. You know, it could be as low as 9,000, but it could be as high as far more than that, right? But we feel pretty good about this 70,000 short-nosed sturgeon number. And what that means is that when we look at the entire coast-wide population of short-nosed sturgeon, from Georgia to maritime Canada, it's likely that the Hudson River has the strongest population. That, thanks to a lot of hard work by the DEC, by individuals, by folks like Riverkeeper, we might be looking at a strong short-nosed sturgeon recovery. So that's a really good news to tout about the Hudson and about one of its most mysterious species. So those of you who know me, and some of you do, know that when it comes to Hudson River fish, there's really only one fish for me, okay? And I don't care, I'm proud of it. I love them all, but there's one that is just extra special, and I brought one to show you guys. So if you look carefully in my little jar here, you'll see what looks like, ooh, it's a wiggly worm, or ooh, it's an underwater snake. But some of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about. That's right. This is a young American eel, probably about 2 or 3 years old, what we might call an elver, but that's just a nickname for that age. It's not a different species. American eels are, for me, one of the most amazing animals out there. They, to me, represent everything we talk about when we talk about the connectivity of people to the water and the connectivity of different habitats from freshwater to saltwater. Some of you may be aware that American eels are diadromous, but they have an opposite life cycle of the sturgeon and the striped bass. American eels and other anguillid eel species hatch out in the ocean. We think somewhere in this broad expanse we nickname the Sargasso Sea, somewhere between Bermuda and Puerto Rico. And then they have this very long 10 to 30 year life cycle of traveling ocean currents as small, transparent leptocephali entering Hudson River tributaries as glass eels, maturing for many, many years as yellow eels. That's actually the age class of eel that you're probably most familiar with if you've been out angling or netting and you find an eel. And then at the very end of their lives, they go through one more transformation. They become a silver eel, adapted once again for ocean travel, and they return, presumably, to the Sargasso Sea to spawn once and die. An amazing, near miraculous life cycle. Also, turns out, dramatically accessible. Some of you may have heard about our Hudson River Eel Project. This focuses on that glass eel, that little baby eel that's making the transition from the ocean to the estuary to the tributaries that David talked about. And every spring, right now, as a matter of fact, we have these fyke nets set up in Hudson River tributaries where teams of trained volunteers, including high school students and watershed groups and retirees, check these nets once per day, remove the eels, count them, record a little bit of data, and then move those eels up above the nearest barrier to migration. Because unfortunately, one of the things that affects these eels are dams, poorly designed culverts, anything that cuts off a tributary from the estuary cuts off an eel from a healthy future. So we're trying to get eels above those dams. And in some cases, we're working with partners like counties and Riverkeeper to remove some of these anachronistic dams that have outlived their service or maybe might even be risky of collapse. So this project, this eel project, all of this data is collected. It's contributing to statewide management systems. And it's a really great example of community science, not just for education purposes, which is great, but also used for monitoring and management. And we're really, really happy about the uses of that. Happy to answer questions about this. And you should also just go ahead and do a deep dive and Google Hudson River Eel Project, and you will go on a long, long roller coaster journey, my friends. I also want to give a special shout out to my DEC colleagues who are working on that silver eel, that adult eel that is really kind of the most mysterious life stage because it happens very quickly because they're going out to sea. My colleague Jess Best has been working hard with her team to apply those bioacoustic tags we talked about with sturgeon, only this time putting them into eels. And what's interesting is she's tagged these adult eels and she's found that some of these, so I'm actually showing a graph here of a couple of tagged eels. So on this graph here on the right, Jess and her team tagged an eel up probably at Black Creek, just south of Kingston. And look, that eel basically has been staying there for the last 2 years. So we thought it was ready to silver based on its size, but it said, nope, I'm going to just linger here in the creek a little bit longer. But a different eel caught, tagged, Jess tagged it right at the right time where you can see it almost immediately started heading south, out to the ocean and likely out to spawn. This is actually a really important data set. We don't have a lot of information on silver eels throughout its entire North American range. So this kind of research is really, really groundbreaking and really helping us set up for some strong eel conservation. Woo! Thank you, Jess Best. I think that another great piece of this eel story is there are some fantastic indigenous leaders that are putting together a program called Eels Back, and I had the privilege of spending some time with them, including several members of the Lenape and Mi'kmaq tribes, out on an eel weir in the Delaware River, where we were again looking at silver eels, these big, large eels that have such tremendous cultural importance for many indigenous nations throughout North America. And so this is, again, this animal has so many deep connections, it never gets boring. Hopefully you have your fish that you're very excited about. And even if you don't have any questions, I invite you in the chat box to just go ahead and tell us, what is your favorite Hudson River fish? Big, small, whatever it might be. And I'm also going to encourage everybody to think about getting out and experiencing some of these fish firsthand. Now, I have no doubt that David and Adam are going to talk in a little bit about some great Riverkeeper projects coming up. I want to give a shout out for a program that is coming out on Saturday, May 30th. This is the Lower Hudson and Harbor Fish Count. It is part of the International World Fish Migration Day. And on this day, you can see on this slide, there's going to be different agencies hosting different free fishing programs. Most of those fishing programs will be done with seine nets. You can see my friends there on the right using a seine net. You put on some waders, you go into shallow water, you never know what you're going to catch. Anybody in the Staten Island area, I'd be happy to meet you at Lemon Creek Park, where I'll be on Saturday, May 30th. But please come down to any of these events and learn about fish firsthand. There's no better way for anybody to learn about the river, whatever your age, than to just be down at the river and experiencing it first time. The water, the weather, the fish, the people, it's all absolutely fantastic. So please consider joining us for the Lower Hudson and Harbor Fish Count on Saturday, May 30th, or any other events that are coming up from any of your local agencies. I feel like I've covered a lot of ground, so I want to stop my slides and instead turn it over to any questions that might come up. And David, if it's okay, I think I'll let you kind of moderate or choose questions if there are any. I haven't even looked, but I'm happy to answer anything at all. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to make up something very, very convincing.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. That was an amazing presentation of just again the just remarkable ecology of the river. All the hydrology is unique. The ecology is fascinating, and I think I met you for the first time at the fish count last year
Uh-huh.
At Kingston Point Beach, and you're right. It's just incredible to see, especially young people. You know,
Yeah.
we collected a pumpkin seed, and they're beautiful. Um, and so you have that sense for, I think for you and me, that sort of youthful sense of like, this is one of the most amazing fish I've ever laid eyes on. But then as sort of the scientists in us, we start thinking about, it has a deep body form. And so it has this job in the river, and the sort of unique importance of that individual fish, for the whole ecosystem. And you convey that to the participants in that event just incredibly. And so thank you for all the work you do. Um,
My pleasure. Looks like
we do have,
we have a
yep,
lot of great questions. Looks like there's a whole bunch that revolve around sturgeon. Should I just do a little sturgeon suite to start up?
sure.
So great, by the way, great questions, including anonymous attendee. I love that name. Um, so just to sort of to kind of address a bunch of sturgeon questions. First of all, yes, sturgeon are protected. In fact, both Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeon are protected by the Federal Endangered Species Act. In fact, short-nosed sturgeon, I believe, were one of the original species protected by that law in the 1970s. Atlantic sturgeon added on a little bit more recently. There are also, by the way, local laws and management policies in place, but both are protected. Anybody who accidentally catches a sturgeon, the best thing to do is take the quickest picture possible and then get that fish off the hook or out of your net and back in the water as quickly as possible. Both species do migrate. The short-nosed sturgeon migrates within the estuary, primarily between, I think I mentioned the Troy Dam and New York Harbor. I'm sure there's a few that kind of pioneer their way out into other waterways. The Atlantic sturgeon, though, is a big migratory fish. And adult Atlantic sturgeon will leave the river and range as far north as Nova Scotia, as far south as the Florida coast, and then come back every few years to spawn. So, the short-nosed sturgeon is probably the good news sturgeon. The Atlantic sturgeon is a more cautious tale. We are seeing a slow, hopeful uptick of Atlantic sturgeon, but it's very, very slow. And part of that is just because we're dealing with a large fish that's very long lived, and populations sometimes take a long time to build up. especially when it comes to fish. In fact, in almost any fish population, if you let the population get too low, even if you leave them alone, there's a momentum to size of population that needs to be regained. And until you get that gain, the growth of that population is going to be very, very slow. So that hopefully, David, that hopefully catches a couple of sturgeon questions. I'll leave the rest to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. And if I recall, I could have this wrong. I think like the population differences somewhere around in the current population size of Atlantic sturgeon somewhere around in the hundreds, and then and the
It it's probably somewhere closer to like 1,500
okay,
to up to 2,000. It's a little bit hard to tell, but we're thinking about 1,500 or so spawning adults is probably a figure. But again, catching and monitoring fish is tough. You're going to have pretty wide what they call confidence intervals, or you're going to have big parentheses on your estimates.
right. And I think we're hearing that perhaps the short-nosed sturgeon population in the Hudson River is upwards of 70,000 or so, maybe making it the largest population of short-nosed sturgeon anywhere in the country,
That is correct. That is correct.
which is wonderful news.
There's strong evidence to say that the Hudson River is the main refugia of the short-nosed sturgeon.
Great. Love good news. Um, let's see. Let's go to a question in the Q&A that is not sturgeon related. Although, yes, there has been reports, right, of sturgeon in the river up to 14 feet long.
Yeah, so we ourselves were shocked when a couple of years ago, some of our colleagues, both with the DEC and the Delaware State, use side scan sonar. Basically, you're taking very detailed images, and both a 12-foot and a 14-foot sturgeon were spied under the water. And I mean, these images are really detailed. Like you can see fins and outlines. Oh, is it a log? Is it a sturgeon? It it was pretty
Wow.
cool to see this. So there's probably not many that old and that large, but there's at least a handful. So
Hmm. Thanks. There's a question in the Q&A on uh, current regulations. Which of the species that you discussed are open to fishing, and what those current regulations might look like.
yeah, good question. So you should the quick story is that fishing regulations are going to be geographically kind of designated. Even within the Hudson River, different sections of the Hudson River are going to have some different regulations. So what you should really do is get onto the DEC website, and they've got really good tools that just kind of walk you through. Okay, if you're fishing in the Tappan Zee, here's the regulations. If you're fishing up near the Catskill Mountains, here's the regulations. But a couple of them go across the board, like sturgeon. No, leave those things alone. We don't need to be targeting sturgeon. Let them have lots of time, and I'm talking years of time for those populations to grow. Similarly with the eels, I want to advocate for if you do catch an eel. A lot of times anglers get angry about eels because they're slimy. They're not easy to get off your hook. People are worried about them being electric or being dangerous, which they're not. Do your best to take that eel off the hook, and let it go back in the river. It's not a parasite. It's not a pest. It is an absolute treasure to have those. So please let those eels go. So basically, those fish right there are fish to be left alone. But there are many other fish that you can happily recreate and pursue, and even in limited amounts in certain places consider eating. And if you're interested in what fish can be eaten where, I strongly recommend you check out the New York State Department of Health. They have got some great fish advisories that are, again, broken down by geography, and they've got maps and pictures and recommendations for different people to on what is safer and what is safer to eat and what maybe should be avoided. We're still working through some of the legacy pollutants of the Hudson River. The good news is we're making some progress. We're making some steps. So check out the Department of Health, and you can get a lot more information about that.
That's great. Thank you. And probably a good practice to continuously check the Department of Health for updates because they're made maybe on an annual basis, maybe a little bit less frequently, but it's always good
Yeah, no,
to
I
check.
think that is a good idea. In fact, I mean, there was a very recent update on fish recommendations that are actually kind of loosening up a little bit. And I say that meaning just that they're finding that there are a few species that are considered by the Department of Health to be more consumable. So you should check that out. There's been a few changes just this past few months from the last several years that are worth looking at. But again, I really want to caution people to check that out carefully because there are still species that you need to avoid or that we recommend that you avoid eating.
Exactly. Thanks. We can go into some fun questions here.
Bring it.
From Alexis, seahorses are so cool. How
Uh,
can we see one?
oh my gosh. Well,
They
there's a
are.
couple places. There's actually a couple places you can see them. Now, most of them are going to be in New York City. So if you're really dying to see a seahorse, I want to recommend a couple places. Brooklyn Bridge Park has a great environmental center, and they often will have seahorses in captivity or seining programs where they can catch some of those fish. I also want to put a special shout out to the River Lab at Pier 40, part of Hudson River Park Trust. My friends there have some great fish tanks set up, and they will frequently have seahorses. And what I love about their programs is they'll keep fish, they'll hold on for a little bit, and then they'll release them. So the fish are on loan just to say hello to passerbyers, and then they're released back in. And then if you're willing to roll the dice a little bit, I mentioned the fishing programs on Saturday, May 30th. Pick one of those lower Hudson spots and New York Harbor spots, and you never know, you might actually catch a seahorse yourself. No guarantees. That's why it's called fishing, not catching. But you might luck out.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm always amazed when I read the DEC almanac, the diversity, particularly of those lower stations from probably following, that incoming tide of
Yeah,
all of the marine species that are found sort of on a haphazard basis. But the diversity in the lower estuary is just incredible.
absolutely. I love just trundling down to Staten Island to go do some fishing down there, just because yeah, that's where I'm going to catch some of the weirder species that I don't always get to see. I'm like, whoo, wonderful.
Nothing like an oyster toadfish to make
Oh,
your day.
oyster toadfish are fabulous. What a thank goodness those exist.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. So here's another question. What's the weirdest fish you've seen? I might have jumped
All
the
right.
shark there a little.
I'm gonna answer a couple ways. First, I'm gonna mention we just talked about the oyster toadfish. Everybody should look up oyster toadfish. They kind of look toady, but they're actually called oyster toadfish because they are one of many fish species that openly make sounds. A lot of people are surprised to learn how vociferous the fish family is. In fact, my colleagues here at the DEC and at Cornell University have been doing a lot of great research on bioacoustics, listening to fish underwater. And oyster toadfish are one of the more vocal ones. They kind of grunt or, they kind of croak like a toad almost. They're also interesting because their color pattern is gorgeous. They're like a jungle cat of brown and cream and black and just the way that they camouflage in the weeds is amazing. And they're also one of the few fish species that has been sent up into space as part of experiments with NASA and the International Space Station. So oyster toadfish, the resume just keeps on growing. Um, I also, back when I worked aboard the Hudson River sloop Clearwater, I was really, really happy because every day the Clearwater crew would put a small trawl net over the side of the boat, and you never know what you're going to pull up. I'll go to the freshwater side here. One of the weirdest fish we ever picked up was near Albany, and it was a white catfish, a good sized 2 foot chunky catfish that had no eyes. I don't mean just like scars where the eyes were. Whatever had happened, the skin had grown over the eyes. Um, but yet, that whatever had happened, parasites had eaten out the eyes or something like that. It had enough senses, its other senses, its lateral line for sensing vibrations, its whiskers for literally tasting the world around it. It was absolutely thriving and able to survive because the waters of the Hudson River are pretty muddy and pretty dark and pretty hard to see in anyway. So that catfish was doing just fine on its other senses, and that was a pretty cool lesson.
That's great. I think the last question that we might want your insight is
Mm-hmm.
from Anonymous. I want to be more involved in protecting fish. What can I do individually?
That's great. And there's a couple things you can do. First of all, I know this sounds very like hokey almost, but there's no better there's nothing better than actually getting out and experiencing these habitats and these fish firsthand. So I strongly recommend going out and visiting streams, visiting the river, spending time by the river and looking around. I strongly recommend considering becoming a recreational angler. That is some of our strongest conservationists are fisher folks, are hunters, are people who are involved firsthand with the proper uh, 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 fishing of our rivers. And so I think like going into that world is a great thing to do as well. Then the other thing that's awesome is we started this thing off talking about watersheds and tributaries and estuaries. The great thing is anything positive you do on land will have positive results in the water. So local trash pickups, like, oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about the river sweep. You know, mad props to Katie Leung and the awesome river sweep program that she leads for Riverkeeper. So picking up trash, picking up marine debris, that is going to directly help habitats and the fish that thrive on them. And then there was a comment in there that was about dams, and that's an interesting world to go into. The United States and New York in particular has got many, 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 many dams, and some of those dams are absolutely essential for drinking water, for hydropower, for a bunch of different uses. But many more of those dams have kind of outlived their use. They may have been a mill dam 150 years ago, and that mill's long gone. Or they might have been backing up water for flood control, but there's we've kind of learned a lot more about flood control in the meantime, and that actually connected rivers do a pretty good job of natural flood control if you can maintain those floodplains. So I think learning a little bit more about dams, that includes websites on the DEC, that includes websites with the Cornell Water Resource Institute, that includes a lot of great work that Riverkeeper has done. Thumbs up, Matt Best. Um, Check out what's going on with dams in your county, and if there's anything you can do to get involved in that. It is sometimes yes, sometimes no. So there's a lot of different things out there.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for fielding that last question too, Chris. We do a lot of work in our habitat restoration efforts on the dam removal side, which we'll hopefully talk about in a little bit. But I just want to thank you again, Chris, for joining us today and sharing all of your wisdom and enthusiasm. It's so well received, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Well, I certainly did. Loved everybody's curiosity, everybody's questions. Keep up that curiosity. And as I always like to say at the end of these things, be the bestuary you can be. Take it easy,
That is
everybody.
great. Thanks, Chris.
Bye all.
And yes, we did see a question in the Q&A, I think, on whether the webinar will be recorded. I believe we are recording, and we can make this available if you'd like to share it with your friends, family, colleagues, and others. So yes, so what's kind of Riverkeeper's role in all of this related to habitat restoration and uh, protecting and restoring the great ecology that Chris talked about? Um, well, first, Riverkeeper as an organization is a member-supported folks like you dedicated to the protection and restoration of the Hudson River, from the source up in the lake tier of the clouds all the way to the sea, to safeguard drinking water supplies through advocacy that's rooted in community partnerships, science, and law. And so we apply this mission by advocating for protections to safeguard habitat for fish, wildlife, and birds across the watershed. We patrol the river. You might have seen the Fletcher, our patrol boat, out on the river. We serve as a watchdog on city, state, and local governments and polluters. This is recorded by our staff, this information by our staff and community volunteers like you, for standard water quality, and we make sure that we ensure compliance with legal requirements and attention to emerging issues, and sometimes have to use legal measures to hold violators accountable. We monitor the water quality of the river at over 100 sampling locations throughout the entire watershed. That's the main stem and tributaries. Again, this information is recorded by both our staff and by community resources and community members. And we collect over 10 water quality parameters, the sort of standard parameters, but also those that specifically indicate contaminants. And by empowering communities that are increasingly threatened by pollution, flood, and drought to make your voices heard, and to assure that the precious resources of the Hudson River watershed remain clean and become cleaner and safer and healthier into the future. So next slide, Adam, thanks. So as Chris mentioned, our habitat restoration program focuses on efforts to restore the Hudson River and its tributaries and shoreline habitats, largely focusing on the removal of obsolete and deteriorating dams, but also cleaning up marine debris, planting native trees and plants, and removing invasive plant species, applying and encouraging nature-based solutions to addressing the effects of development and climate change. We advocate at the local, state, and federal levels of government for protection of critical habitats, improved fisheries management, endangered species conservation, and improving resilience and protection of Hudson River communities. So I grew up in the Hudson Valley and moved away 20 something years ago, recently returned. In all my travels around the country, I would boast about the uniqueness of the Hudson River among the nation's large rivers due to the presence of only one dam, like Chris and I talked about earlier, only one dam over the first 150 miles upstream. And this is unique among the nation's large rivers. But what I wasn't aware of is that there are more than 4,000 dams in the tributaries of the Hudson River across the watershed. The vast majority of these structures are obsolete, deteriorating, legacy from old industry and mill operations, largely not maintained. They still present a barrier to movement of aquatic organisms, as well as alter and present a risk to flooding and degrade habitat and fundamentally alter the hydrology and water quality in and around the dam. So Riverkeeper has been fortunate to secure funding to remove several of these attractive nuisances, with the objective of reducing flood risk to the community, restoring access to critical habitat for migratory fishes and aquatic invertebrates and other wildlife, and return the system to its natural connected state. Next slide, Adam. So we are also working to minimize the threat of invasive and destructive plants and animals throughout the watershed. We do this through annual invasive species management fieldwork activities and events that we plan. It's really uh, hard to believe, frankly, that nearly a quarter of the fish species in the Hudson and its tributaries are non-native, and many are having a negative impact on native populations of aquatic organisms. One invasive fish species, for example, the round goby that you might have heard of, has over the past several years has crossed from the Great Lakes through the Erie Canal into the Mohawk River and now being found in the Hudson River. The goby is a voracious predator of eggs of native fishes, as well as a vector for spreading a deadly viral disease. And this virus causes mass mortality, or can, in many native fish species. We've begun to evaluate the spread of goby, particularly in tributaries of the Hudson, where not a lot of information exists. And we're examining habitat associations that these invasive species are having with native species, and interactions with native species, in the event to minimize the effect of goby in the Hudson River watershed. We actively, or we all likely have seen water chestnut out in the river. These sort of spiny, seeded, dense mats that choke out the freshwater bays, block sunlight, create hazards for swimmers and boaters. And so we're actively supporting efforts from the DEC and local communities to prevent the spread of water chestnut in the Hudson. And the zebra mussel, which we probably all have heard of. This is a highly invasive, small freshwater mollusk, like a clam, and they're widespread through the Hudson and continues to threaten the river by clogging intake pipes, harming native species. And we're supporting efforts for boaters to clean, drain and dry their watercraft after their activities, where zebra mussels might be present to avoid their spread. And thanks. And through our legislative and policy advocacy, Riverkeeper has played a primary role in modernizing the Freshwater Wetlands Act, strengthening protections for endangered species, and building climate resilience, particularly through flood risk mitigation. In 2022, Riverkeeper helped pass the New York, New Jersey Watershed Act, securing $20 million to protect and restore the Hudson River. And we're engaging on multiple levels with fisheries regulators and managers. This is at the state, interstate, and federal level, including providing subject matter expertise on and comments to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, charged with managing fisheries across state borders, particularly in coastal waters, for striped bass management. And this has contributed to improved conservation measures to help recover the species. And so for more information, I just kind of point you to several web links that you can find on the Riverkeeper website. The first is our new water quality portal. This is an interactive map that to allow users to explore. It's a very user-friendly platform to allow folks to explore water quality throughout the Hudson River watershed with data that Riverkeeper and our partners collect. You can dive into when and where it's safe to swim and boat, how clean your drinking water is, and the health of the watershed's fish populations, and recently added another element of that where you can look at the effects of climate change in the areas where you live. So you can also go, we have a habitat restoration web link on our webpage where you can learn more about the habitat restoration programs, efforts to restore the Hudson River and its tributaries. And finally, as we've heard, every year, the Hudson River supports this epic migration. We think of it as sort of like the Great Migration on the Serengeti River of the large mammals. That's happening right now, like right below the surface of the Hudson River. Just an incredible migration. Many of the species that Chris talked about earlier are already on their way back to the Hudson or in the Hudson. This is the Atlantic sturgeon, the American eel, striped bass, American shad, river herring, all returning on their journey either to spawn or for in the eel's sake to spend 20 or 30 years before it heads back out to the ocean to spawn. And they've done this for millennia. So on Saturday, June 20th, this incredible journey comes back to life in kind of in in real life during the Riverkeeper's fish migration celebration. So we're inviting you to join us for a fun, fantastic day where art and advocacy set sail together. There'll be a flotilla, sort of a boat processional that will begin in Yonkers. I think around 11 o'clock or noontime, they will leave and then chart a course to Newburgh on the west side of the river, where we'll land at Unico Park around 7 p.m. to celebrate with a community gathering featuring art making, a puppet parade, lots of great music and other events that will make for a really fun day. So we invite everyone to join us on June 20th for the Great Fish Migration Celebration. And I think with that, we're probably near time. I want to thank everyone who joined us today to talk with Chris Bowser about the amazing ecology of the Hudson River. And again, I believe this is recorded, this webinar, so we'll make this available for any folks who couldn't make it today, or if you'd like to share it with others. So thanks again and have a great rest of your afternoon.